There are hundreds of units in Warhammer 3 and each one is its own puzzle you need to work out to beat them. So today I'm here to make it real simple and tell you how to beat every single unit in the game. Now obviously I'm not going to go through every single unit one by one since that would take literally days. Instead I'm going to separate units into archetypes and apply the same device to basically everything of the same type. I actually made a video similar to this on how to play every single unit in the game, so we'll be doing the same process as that, just the other way around. So let's kick things off with melee infantry. Line holders and meat shields first up, and these are probably the most common type of melee infantry you'll come across in the game. Some good examples are Empire Spearmen and Chaos Warriors. The hallmarks of line holding infantry is high defensive stats like armor, defense or resistance, lower damage stats like attack and weapon strength alongside higher leadership and sometimes shields. These are units that will stand and fight holding back troops without dealing much damage of their own, instead relying on other units to deal all the damage for them. The thing with these types of units is that taking them out is normally the wrong way to deal with them. Instead you want to take out their damage dealers like monsters or ranged units, and they'll essentially be useless since they have no real way of their own to deal a lot of damage. Especially with how tough they can be to most forms of damage, they can be extremely difficult to get rid of, so prioritizing their damage dealers is the way to go to make them useless. If they're all that's left on the enemy side and you really want to take them down fast, armor piercing damage to the rear is the way to go. Shields and charge defense are much less effective when they're attacked in the rear, so flanks with missile units or cavalry will be the way to go to take them down fast. Damage dealers are obviously much more threatening no matter what speciality they come with. Some good examples are Dwarf Hammerers and Greenskin's Black Orcs. Most of the time, damage dealers swap with line holders so have much low defense but much high damage, often with a bonus versus a particular kind of unit like infantry or large. This makes them very difficult to engage in melee, as even your most defensive troops will take a lot of hits if they go up close and personal. However, most damage dealing infantry lack shields, making them extremely vulnerable to ranged damage. This makes picking them apart on the approach much easier, either with ranged infantry or artillery. Just make sure you have armor piercing if the target is armored, otherwise you'll be looking at a massive amount of inefficiency. If you're not playing as a faction that can rely on ranged, the only other way to beat these types of units is to overwhelm them with damage of your own to burst them down before they can get much value. That means totally surrounding them with whatever you can that's high damage to take them down as quickly as possible. You'll take more damage than simply sniping them from a range, but it's the next best thing if you have no other choice. Just make sure you stay on top of the micromanagement and get rid of them fast. Flankers are a bit of a niche melee infantry units like Nasty Skulkers or Demonettes of Slaanesh, and they work very similarly to cavalry. Use their high speed to get around to your backlines and take out ranged infantry, or charge the rear of your front lines to take them down fast. Well, they should, but this is Total War AI we're talking about, so this is the best that we can do. If they do their job right, they can be hard to deal with, but if you can stop them getting off successful flanks, they'll lose much of their power. Pinning them down with melee infantry or cavalry will lose them most of this power, and in a fair fight they're generally not the best. They rely on their flanks to take down weaker units, so if you get on one-on-one with something that can fight, they generally don't last too long. You can also focus fire them with ranged units as they make their flanks, and even with their higher speed, they'll take a lot of damage en route, making them much less effective if and when they land. It can be a little bit tricky since you don't see them too often, but they're really not that bad once you get down to it. There's another way that you can easily beat these guys alongside all other units in game, and that's with some holy energy. If you want smooth, sustained energy without all the sugar and other unhealthy BS that traditional energy drinks are full of, then you should try holy energy. They've got a range of delicious natural flavors. You can try almost all of them by picking up a starter set at the link below. While you're there, use code Colonel5 for £5 off your first order and code Colonel for 10% off every order after. Click the link below to grab some for yourself, and thanks to Holy for partnering with the channel. Coming now to the ranged infantry, first off we have the firing arc. These are units like crossbowmen and Sisters of Avalon that can comfortably sit on enemy backlines and fire on your units from relative safety. They don't have to worry about getting a good angle or putting themselves out of position, so it can be in difficult positions to take them down. Their damage is normally lower armor piercing than something like handgunners, but with enough focus fire, it still takes its toll, so it's best to take them down as soon as possible. The best option for these types of units will always be something fast like cavalry or monsters, depending on the amount of resistance they'll put up in melee. High speed is the priority to get around any enemy front lines and take them down before anything can react. Sustained combat cavalry is really the best option, as they can hit hard with the charge and take out what remains without needing to be pulled out and in for optimal damage. Charging cav can do just as well, but require a little bit more space and micro to do the same job as easily. With units like these, you want to make sure that they are either shattered or wiped out, as if they regain confidence and return to combat, they'll get right back to work without much trouble with the long range and curved firing arc. If you don't have as many fast units, I'd prioritize a shielded front line to absorb as much as possible, followed by high damage monsters or missiles of your own to push through front lines and into the soft backline. Even that or missiles of your own, since these units are almost always low on armor and other defenses, so are easily taken down by basically anything. It all really depends on who you're playing and who you're against, but one of these three options will always have you covered. Line of sight units are the much higher damage ranged infantry option, but they're a lot tougher to use. Some good examples are Empire Nuln Ironsides and Chaos Dwarf Blunderbusses. They require a clean line of sight between them and their target, meaning they'll struggle to hit most things from the back line. Against large targets that stand above infantry, they'll have a field day, but against most normal infantry, they will struggle. The same strategies as the arcs units will apply, but you'll need to be a lot more careful on the approach and work harder to move them around to avoid their fire. Their high damage will focus on anything that moves to flank them, so if your cavalry are charging at them head on, they'll likely take some hits for their trouble, potentially reducing their ability to see the following melee through to the end. If you instead move around them on the approach, they'll struggle to land clean shots and allow your units to move in much easier. And this goes for land or flying, cav and monsters. You can still take them out with ranged infantry of your own, just be aware of them returning fire. And the front line's steamroll strategy also works well, just be careful of using large units as they are easily focused down. Coming out to the cav and chariots, first up, sustained combat cavalry. These are cav units that are made for staying in combat for prolonged periods of time. Some good examples of this are the Grail Guardians and the Chaos Knights. These units often have high defensive and melee stats, but lower charge, making them much more effective in standard combat rather than charging. They're normally the biggest threat to your backlines, as we just covered, and are one of the harder units to take out. They often have shields, strong damage and defense, making them very hard to take down no matter how you look at it. The best way to negate their threats is by keeping your ranged units close by to support, like your front lines or other strong melee fighters. If you can hold them back with melee infantry, or even better, take them down with some anti-large damage dealers, they'll struggle to get as much value as if they freely took down your ranged units. Plus, once they get locked in melee, you can use those ranged units to take them down fast with that reduced shield efficacy. Either one of these will work to take them down quickly, as their larger hitboxes make them take far more damage per second than some equivalent infantry. The other option is to hunt them down with cavalry or monsters of your own, but this can be challenging if you're up against something like Demigryph halberds. You have to weigh up if your unit can beat theirs and react accordingly. The main priority should always be keeping your backline safe, as that's where they'll aim to get the most value and take away most of yours. Shock cavalry are instead focusing on charging in and out of combat to deal large bursts of damage rather than landing and sticking around. Examples of this are Blood Knights and Dragon Princes. They have lower melee and defensive stats, but normally have higher damage and a lot of charge bonus. They can go for backlines just like the sustained combat cavalry, or they can charge the backs of the front lines to shatter them in moments, so they're a much larger threat, but also require a bit more finesse to use well. And as I mentioned, this is Total War AI, so that finesse is sometimes lacking. However, if you're going against them being used optimally, the best way to take them out is to bog them down. If you can stop them moving and engage them in either melee or with ranged troops, they'll go down in moments thanks to their lower defense. Even if they technically have more damage, they'll struggle to deal with it with lower attack stats and no space to move. Once they charge in, retaliate by attacking them with anything nearby, ideally surrounding them to prevent their escape. Once this happens, they'll either get caught in combat and can be taken down however you like, or they'll continuously try to run away and be picked apart in the process. It's a real simple fix, but don't think it'll be so easy to pull off. Their charge can send units flying, so make sure you have something else on standby to react, whether it's cavalry of your own, a nearby melee infantry, or anything else. Missile and skirmish are technically two types of cavalry, but I'm going to cover them here as one, as they'll work more or less the same when looking to counter them. Missile cavalry are things like Outrider grenade launchers that can only fire in one direction. These work like ranged infantry and can be taken out much the same way, only you'll need something much faster. They normally still lack any real melee ability, so once you close the gap, they'll go down in moments. Or they can be taken out with range damage of your own, which should be no problem given their larger size and generally shorter range. Skirmishing cav and by extension skirmishing ranged infantry, which I'll cover here too for simplicity's sake, can fire in any direction whilst moving, meaning they can be placed on skirmish mode and run away from approaching enemies whilst getting off essentially free damage. Units like the Free Company Militia and the Marauder Horsemen are good examples of skirmishers. Their damage and range is normally lower than standard ranged units, but comes with this added mobility, meaning it's a lot easier for them to constantly be firing and get favourable angles a lot easier. The way to take them out is pretty much the same as regular missile cavalry. If you have something fast like cav or monsters, then they'll almost certainly go down easily in melee. Otherwise, ranged focus is still a good choice since their toughness is normally low to keep them mobile. Chariots can come in melee and ranged variants, but the way to take them out is pretty much the same. They normally come with high mass and charge bonus, meaning a lot more damage on impact than most cavalry, at the cost of being a much smaller unit size, with 4 normally being the maximum possible size. They're both pretty easily taken down if you force them into sustained melee combat with pretty much anything. A large hitbox size combined with their awkward 2-part construction makes it basically impossible for them to escape being bogged down against anything remotely heavy. Plus, they take a ton of hits per second and get wiped out in moments against basically anything that can fight in melee. Anti-large and armor piercing obviously make this a lot better, but that goes for anything. Ranged units aren't quite as effective as the smaller entity count makes them a little harder to hit when on the move, so just keep them well back and safe from charges and leave this one to the melee troops, at least until they stop moving. Once they go for a charge, make sure it's their last. Coming out to the beasts and monsters, first up, flankers. These will be similar to cavalry when looking to counter, since they'll be doing the same sort of job, but their approach is just a little different. Warhounds are the most common kind of flanking monsters, but dragon ogres would be the best fit for a late game example. They'll still be trying to get around your front lines and into vulnerable ranged units. If it's something weak like warhounds, then engaging them in melee with anything that can actually fight will be the way to go, as their stats will not hold up against non-ranged units. Some quick melee infantry or tougher early cav will do great to intercept and take them down no problem. Late game units can be taken out the same way alongside ranged focus. Dragon ogres are quite large, so make for an easy tag if you're ranged units to focus down. Just make sure you have enough armor piercing to take down your target, otherwise it's a waste of time and ammo. Frontlines monsters are the most common type you'll find in the game, and these are things like trolls and chaos spawn. They're going to go into melee alongside enemy infantry and provide a big boost to damage, taking out your infantry in no time. Fortunately, there's a large number of things you can do to knock them down quite a few pegs. First of all, very defensive front lines with anti-large specialization will be a great foundation to hold them back for a long time and deal some decent damage whilst they do. You can go for damage dealing front lines with anti-large, but they'll take quite a few hits in doing this, so you'll need to be prepared for that and make sure you take them down before they do the same to you. You'll also want to surround enemy monsters. Their larger hitboxes make them take a lot of hits per second, so making sure that you've got that number as high as possible will ensure they go down quickly. And lastly, ranged units are by far the easiest way to take down frontlines monsters. Provided they're fairly large, most ranged units will have no problem landing shots on them in melee, regardless of if your own units are in the way. The higher the damage, the better. Just make sure they have a clear line of sight, otherwise they'll sit there being useless. Artillery are fairly simple to take out, but that doesn't mean they're easy. They have a massive range and normally massive damage, meaning they can take units apart on the approach before they ever get close. Similar to ranged infantry, the best way to take them out is something fast like cavalry or monsters. You'll likely need to send this unit around the entire enemy army to close the gap, so something very fast is preferable to shut them down quickly. Artillery are often also protected by something, so high sustained damage is the way to go to take them down fast. If you have something with massive range yourself, you can also shoot back at them, and if you destroy their weapons, they'll be basically useless. However, this does require a lot of accuracy alongside missing out on shooting the rest of the enemy army, so is normally not the best option. Artillery should always be a very high priority target, so choose something to take them out, and do it fast to cut off any value. War machines are a little bit niche, and only a few really exist in the game, like the steam tank. Normally they're a bit all around with big range damage alongside serious toughness and some melee power, making them incredibly hard to fight. However, they're almost always single entities, so focus firing them with an overwhelming amount of armor piercing range damage is a great idea to shut them down quickly as possible with minimal risk to your own units. If this isn't an option, then totally surround them with high anti-large and armor piercing damage, and that'll do the trick, just with a little more melee risk involved. Lords and heroes can come in all manner of shapes and sizes alongside mounts, changing their jobs and stats massively. No matter the form, they're incredibly high value targets and put up a remarkable fight, making them extremely hard to take down. However, they still normally fall into one of a few roles, so we're going to do a lot of generalizing to keep things safe. Frontlines experts are your Goroks and Vlad von Karsteins. They're melee powerhouses and their attacks deal huge area damage, sometimes incorporating some crazy animations to spread the love to as many enemy units as possible. They're extra tough and deal loads of damage to whatever they hit, making them a real terror to take on in melee. If you can focus fire them, then they're a lot easier to take down, but their unmounted size can make them quite a small target, alongside the fact that this option requires them to be stood in the open, which they won't do for long. Surrounding them with high damage melee infantry and monsters can do well, but you will absolutely take some hits, so just be prepared if you go this route. Spells can be strong for some single target damage alongside reducing their stats, just make sure you time these well to get the most bang for your buck. There's no easy risk-free way to get rid of these guys, so just do your best to focus fire them whenever you can and throw damage at them once they close the gap to get them gone as soon as possible. Duelists are very slightly different to frontlines experts, and it normally comes down to improved melee stats, particularly defense, very high armor piercing damage, and subdued animations. If they move around less when attacking, they're more likely to land clean on another lord or hero, making them much better suited for the job. The way to take them out is similar to before, just be extra cautious about sending in lords and heroes of your own to take them on, as they can easily hit back. Snipers are quite a rare lord type, like Marcus Wolfhart and Elif Anar. They're essentially ranged lords, and they want to stand at the back and fight on key targets, just like ranged infantry. This throws a spanner in the works of the usual flank with cavalry, since they can normally put up a decent fight, making a quick blitz attack almost impossible. Don't get me wrong, if you surround them with high damage, they'll eventually lose, but it won't be as quick as normal ranged infantry, making it a lot riskier a mission. Generally, it's best to simply shut down their ranged with some less expendable units and push your advantage on the front lines before you break through and take them on with more powerful melee units and your own lords and heroes. Just make sure the coast is clear before you send these in, as the last thing you want is getting trapped on the back lines with no way out. Lastly, we have these spell casting characters, and these can either be pure spellcasters with no other combat abilities, or they can take part in one of the other three roles at the same time. If we're talking the latter, then the same advice as before applies, only now have an even higher priority on them since spells can be devastating. For the former, however, it's normally even easier. Pure spellcasters normally have pathetic stats in pretty much everything, so are extremely easy to take out from a range or in melee. Sending duelist heroes to take them down fast works great alongside normal flanking units like cavalry, monsters. The priority is taking them down fast and stopping them from casting so they can get no value. The best way to do that is to hit them hard and don't stop until they stop. And always keep an eye out for incoming enemy spells so you're able to dodge. You'll always see the outline of most spells before they land, so if you see one of these over a big clump of your units, move them out of the way to save yourself some headache. And that is how to beat every single unit in Total War Warhammer 3. Let me know any questions you have in the comments below and I'll do my best to help you out. Like, subscribe, become a member to see yourself in the credits, and if you want more Warhammer 3 videos, then why not check out this one on the Southern Realms modded faction.